Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the ongoing series of Interview with an Exorcist. I'm here with Dr. Douglas Gabriel, and I'm John Barnwell, and we're here in the great state of Michigan, uh, depending on how you look at it. But we've been getting such wonderful feedback regarding some of the subjects that we touched on, speaking about Waldorf education and Rudolf Steiner's work in relation to that. And we would be amiss if we didn't delve deeper. But since so many newcomers have been showing up, I'm going to share with you some of Dr. Gabriel's curriculum vitae. He has a double BA in Anthroposophical Studies and British History and a double MA in Waldorf Education and Public School Administration through the University of Detroit, Mercy College, a BA and an MA in Religious Formation, a PhD in Philosophy, and a PhD in Comparative Religions, a Doctor of Divinity, and is certified K through 12 and certified as a Michigan School Administrator and Waldorf School Administrator through Wayne State University and the Waldorf Institute of Mercy College. He is a retired Waldorf teacher and teacher trainer of 40 years who's taught at 4 American Waldorf Teacher Training Institutes and has raised millions of dollars for Waldorf schools and the publishing of hundreds of Waldorf curriculum books, including the Foundations of Waldorf Education series funded by the Waldorf Educational Fund that he founded. He was a long-standing member of the pedagogical section in the College of Teachers and was a founding member of AWSNA Business Management Group. He's written 4 books on Waldorf education, professional articles, and made hundreds of podcasts on Steiner's teachings and Waldorf education. His books, The Spirit of Childhood, The Eternal Curriculum, Intuitive Learning, and The Eternal Ethers are found at eternalcurriculum.com. His articles and podcasts are found at ourspirit.com. Dr. Gabriel has been a consultant to Waldorf schools worldwide for decades and has helped found numerous Waldorf schools. He's married to Dr. Tyler Gabriel, the author of the Gospel of Sophia trilogy, and she's a naturopathic doctor and extremely experienced educator and literally a human dynamo. But this is one of those wonderful moments where you realize that you're talking with somebody that knows what they're talking about. And that's very important in this world because educational standards have become, shall we say, nebulous. Is that there's people running around trying to present Waldorf education that really haven't done the deep study of Rudolf Steiner's work, and being that Waldorf education is, as was once said by one of the chief people founding their impulses in Detroit, anthroposophy, anthroposophy, anthroposophy.
Wow, I want to meet that dude. That's quite a resume he's got there.
Yeah, I figured I'd lay the whole thing out.
Yeah.
It's like, and if people want to run and hide, that's fine. It is intimidating.
Well, usually people, wherever I go, whatever I do, whatever institution I enter in, and once Eve Hardy said, Douglas, how can you imagine any institution could hold you? Of course, you go in, they accept you, they put you at the top, you run it for a while, then they pull you down, torture you, crucify you, and forget about you. So, why did you think any organization, the Catholic Church or anthroposophy or Waldorf education or any of it could actually hold someone who just I don't know, what would you call that? That's an overachiever there. That's the curricula vitae of an overachiever, but also somebody who's obviously on the quest for something he can't find.
Well, I have to interject, though, that one of the real challenges with Rudolf Steiner's work is plainly it's difficult and it requires a systematic, dedicated study. I mean, there's some 600 or 6,586 or so lectures, and then there's all various 50 plus published articles, books. And so it's a huge body of work occupying 36 and a half feet of shelf space in a library. So given that, I think a lot of people throw up their hands because they realize that in a sense, I think with a lot of them, it's just jealousy because they don't really know, and they're doing this job and they're just kind of winging it, and they don't really have the backstory. And that's why having somebody like you is actually a national treasure, being the protege of Werner Glass, the principal individual for Waldorf education in North America. And whenever he would get something he didn't have time for, he'd go, Douglas?
Yeah. He once called me in his office. He says, Douglas, I just returned from talking to the king of Jordan, and I told him I couldn't do his education system, but would you like to go do it? These are the things that Werner would say to me. And I'd like, I can't even comprehend what you just said, Werner. And he was a great educational person. He debated Piaget. Okay, how do you debate Piaget? I mean, really, how do you stand up to Maria Montessori? How do you talk down the Theosophists? How do you know Marilyn Monroe and all the people in Hollywood, and yet at the same time you're connected to your uncle, Dr. Norbert Glass, who basically had one of Rudolf Steiner's siblings living with him at the end of his life and knew more about anything in anthroposophy in the English-speaking world than anyone else. That's who raised Werner. He and Hans, my two teachers who ran the Waldorf Institute in Detroit, were both Viennese Jews who escaped the Anschluss by minutes and escaped to England and learned perfect English and were both geniuses. And they really were quite amazing people. But today I just wanted, as you read all this, okay, here we're having an interview with an exorcist who was a Waldorf teacher. How many exorcisms did he do on his children in the class would be your first question. No, I didn't do those things once I became a Waldorf teacher, as I was trying to explain before, but I didn't make it clear. I gave up being a priest and became a server in the Christian community, thinking that at the end I'd be a Christian community priest once I'd been a Waldorf teacher for decades, done the system through the 8 years a few times and helped out a community, because Rudolf Steiner said Waldorf schools would be islands of culture in the future. And that's what I had experienced at that time. As I looked around, there was very little culture anywhere. But if you went to the Waldorf schools, everything was happening. All the alternative people there were there, the vegans, the vegetarians, the biodynamic gardeners, the people doing art, everything. It was like entering into Hermann Hesse's Castilia, where the glass bead game would be played. And that is what we closed with last time, is to say that the Waldorf curriculum is the glass bead game, because it's a mix of history, science, art, religion, all types of music, architecture, you name it, it comes into the Waldorf curriculum. And there's almost nothing that isn't taught from first grade through eighth grade in the Waldorf curriculum. And so when I accepted that job after going through the Institute, through the orientation year, and then the Waldorf teacher training program, and then out to Mercy College, which is now University of Detroit, and finishing a degree, multiple degrees. And I finally decided to. I was teaching in the kindergarten, and there was this beautiful group of children. And one day, towards the end of the year, when they decided that the children have first grade readiness, I'm looking at them going, oh my, every child that's ready for first grade is an angel. I mean, is one of the most beautiful children I've ever seen. And literally to this day, a couple of them are the most beautiful children I've ever had the privilege of teaching. And so they were in the kindergarten, and I was their kindergarten, like I did NAP, and I was a kindergarten assistant and worked on the playground as a supervisor, and also taught in the high school because I had, all these degrees. And so I helped everybody out in all levels. But here are these children that were so beautiful, I wanted to run away from Detroit, but I didn't. I stayed for those children. One of those children showed up in my life many years later, and she's now one of the top photographers for National Geographic. And I'd have to say that it was her that I loved that child so much. Both of her parents were killed in a car wreck, and the parents who had adopted her was the mother's sister. These children are so beautiful that when I looked at them, I said, I can't let you just go into first grade without me. I'm going to go with you. So I applied for first grade and they hired me immediately. But I stopped the exorcism. I stopped working with the Catholic Church. I did any of that from then on, gratis, pro bono, and under the name Gabriel. So I did readings under the name Gabriel, but none of my parents in the class or anybody knew about that. That was I just did that on the side to help people. So all that I was doing before was turned into what I was then doing in the Waldorf school. And now I'd like to address the question of what we came up with last time, which is Waldorf education, as the old anthroposophists said, one of the three ways that you can reach initiation in this incarnation through Rudolf Steiner's insight and through one of his practical applications, in this case, Waldorf education. And also they included gardening and they included studying the foundation stone meditation, which I had already done both of those quite a bit. So I decided, okay, I'm going to enter into this initiation. And here's these beautiful children, and none of them need exorcisms. And I can say this as a prior exorcist and as a priest. These children came from really healthy families because they ate well. These were people who ate biodynamic food. Rudolf Steiner said Waldorf education would be wasted on a child who did not have proper nutrition. So these were from very, very healthy families in the Detroit area, coming down to Indian Village to this beautiful old school that was for the early rich people from the auto industry. And I lived in a mansion down the street, or and managed 14 others. And all the Waldorf teacher trainers and people of the Institute, I was the one who was managing their, what would you call it, their rental spaces that they were renting from the people I lived with who owned all these places. And I ran the bookstore. So that gives you where I was at. And I was completely happy. Why? Because I knew that this curriculum was so profound that I needed to do it to myself. I needed to take myself through this. And I thought I was going to do it one time. I've taught all the grades numerous times, but I thought I was going to do it one time. And I was already in kindergarten. I was very happy, preschool, kindergarten. Now I'm going to take 1st through 8th grade. And so, of course, I'd already been trained in all of this, but now I had to do it. And it was indeed the most profound thing that I ever did. From the first night that I went to sleep in the bed, I couldn't put covers over me because the children's etheric bodies had entered into my etheric body from one day. Well, because I'd memorized the whole thing that I was doing. And so on the first day, it was full on. This wasn't, we're just starting off with slowly. No, we did tons of stuff from day one. So that night, I couldn't put the sheets, I couldn't put the blankets over me at night. And I stayed up all night long because now my etheric body was gigantic. It wasn't just my etheric body. I was carrying every one of those children in my body. And I mean this quite literally. Now, Rudolf Steiner says that when you become intimately connected to someone, that's an astral connection that lasts 7 years. But when you're connected to someone's etheric body, I'm still in those children. I can still feel them. And they call me up and they tell me what they're doing. I'm thinking, I know about when they're going to call me or contact me on Facebook. And I actually have a feeling of what they're about to tell me when they do. And I've watched these children become amazing human beings. I could go into a whole list of amazing things they've done, and the wonderful children that I got to teach at the Detroit Waldorf School who became everything. They didn't become one thing. They became astounding people in their own area because we taught them how to have freedom and how to have respect for the entire global culture of the world. And that's what the curriculum is. Not only is it the secret teachings of Aristotle on how you train up a leader, or it's not just the teachings of Plato, it's not just the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote for the King of Cyprus on the education of kings. It's not just Agidius de Romanus, Agidius Romanus de Colonna, who was also called Giles of Rome, who are my teacher's teacher, said Rudolf Steiner got the curriculum from. Well, you can't get that in English. I've tried to ferret it out in Old English. All I can tell you is that, yes, Rudolf Steiner did take his curriculum to a degree from that. But what wasn't in that is the historical, well, what we would call history, or the development of culture in human spiritual evolution. And that's the issue that really I find to be at the core. And that's why in the Eternal Curriculum for Wisdom Children, I put in here not only selections that you can read the children to give you ideas of what to do with the cultural, the literature that comes from that culture, the cultural legacies that we have to address as a Waldorf teacher, but I also put in there inspirational, meditative stuff that you can contemplate as you're teaching your child, so that as your child is going through this curriculum, you as a parent or a teacher can go through it yourself and not only have the benefit of what you're teaching them and watching them have their developmentally appropriate response to it, but it's you yourself healing your miseducation, your Prussian military education of America, which John can address that. We're stuck in an old Prussian system in the public school system. So if you don't go to a Waldorf school or a Montessori school or some other truly alternative school, the curriculum is basically going to be the same old materialism that you find in every school. But in a minute, I'm going to address the battle that Steiner had at his time, which was a battle between the Prussian educational system, which basically said, when you turn your child over to the school, which will be from preschool on, and we're going to charge people taxes, and we're going to train teachers and have teacher training institutes, and it's going to be a serious military education. Your child is a child of the state. And we might give them back, we might not. But we do expect them to go into the military to maintain the Prussian military state. Is that not exactly what we have here in America? We don't even have an educational philosophy. I used to say this to people when I would address sometimes thousands of teachers as a Waldorf representative. I'd ask them, raise your hand if you have an educational philosophy that you can name the person that it came from. No hand went up in the whole room, except Waldorf or Montessori. That's it. There is no educational philosophy in America. The Dewey Decimal System, or believe it or not, phrenology, the bumps on your head. That's it, folks. There is no philosophy of education in America. But what we've done is we've adopted the Prussian method. Well, I'll just jump into it. It's William Humboldt was basically taking the best example of it. Well, Humboldt basically was the guy who said, we're going to make it official. Everything I just described is Prussian. But then there was Oswald Spengler. Oh, Oswald Spengler. He came along. Steiner had to complain about him all the time. And then there was Johannes Froebel. And Steiner complained about him all the time because they said they were just materialists. But they did go in the right direction, as Steiner said. So anyway, John, jump in here and save me. What do you think about John Taylor Gatto and his assessment of Waldorf education?
Well, to drill down a little bit into what you've said, and then I'll segue into some of Gatto's content, because see, when you understand what education is, the history of education, you go back to the school, the academy, Plato's academy, which is really crucial. Then you have the Lyceum, and you have Aristotle. And so you have this whole developmental theme that comes out of ancient Greece, and then becomes more formalized in Rome, and then you have the development of the two fundamental areas that are so significant of philosophy in the East, and then the legal system in the West of Rome, and you see all that. And why am I mentioning those? Because that's an example of what Dr. Gabriel is trying to convey here, is that there's a morphology of history. And when you get into talking about some of these subjects, there's nobody that can take you as deep into the subject as Rudolf Steiner's work. He made that a central point. And furthermore, it's also central to understanding his method of self-development, because he was very clear in that he pointed out imagination, inspiration, and intuition, but rather we should say moral imagination, moral inspiration, and moral intuition. But that realm of moral inspiration that can be derived through contact with the arts and with music and speech and theater and ritual activity, rhythmic activity, but also history. And that's to me, the critical juncture for understanding Waldorf education is to gain access to his cosmological ideas as they relate to history. And being that I taught in a master's program, world history and American history for a Waldorf system, I tried to give people a thematic understanding of this metamorphosis of cultures over thousands of years. And, I have over here a 4-volume bibliography on ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia that I compiled. So it's something I've spent a great deal of time on. And I can tell you that I've met people from all over the world, and I can't find a person that's more knowledgeable in these areas than Dr. Gabriel. But that being said, I will continue a little bit on John Taylor Gatto, because he's so critical, being that he ran a school in a troubled area of New York, and he went in there and he transformed their education so that he started producing students that were winning awards and going on to these incredible jobs. And he had a very interesting take on education, but this is going into more when you get into high school education and on into whatever college may be, where he talked about the way the elites are taught in the college system, in the Ivy League college system that most people don't know much about. They've heard of it, but they don't really realize that the way they teach is different. You have to write a paper every day. You don't know if they're going to take it and read it, and you don't know if you're going to have to stand up and present it, but you do presentations every week, and that is a critical point. And that's where people that go into leadership roles in politics or, which is, unfortunate, but then leadership roles in companies and all, they come out of that kind of an education, most of them. And anybody can do that. You don't have to go to an Ivy League school to figure out how to be a writer and to be able to learn to speak in front of other people and get over being so nervous about it, or performing music in front of people, giving a presentation. So all of these things that have to do with the will are so critical in understanding the thematic development of breathing and rhythm within education. The more that can be incorporated, the more wholesome will be the result.
So true. If you're ask yourself the question, okay, if I am my child's teacher, what should I teach my child? And by the way, what am I teaching them towards? And by the way, how do I know what they brought into the classroom that I need to work with? So what do they bring from before their birth? And what is it that you're supposed to give them so that by the time they reach whatever stage you want to give them, whatever age where they're citizens of the modern world, what is it that you need to give them if you were a parent and you were thinking of this? And of course, Rudolf Steiner in 1905 wrote his first book called The Education of the Child. And he said that, well, first we need, in that book, he says, we need to recognize that there are different births. There's the birth to the mother. And for 7 years, they're in the mother school. And what does the mother teach them? Everything through imitation. Absolutely anything in the child's environment, they will imitate. Dad and I are having such great fun with one of her grandchildren who comes over because I act the fool and then he'll repeat it. And it's just hysterical. He'll just watch, and then boom, he'll do it. Which, that's what happens when you're, from birth to 7. You're going to do anything that's in your environment. They call it now in psychology. Let's see, there's nature and nurture. This is nurture. How you nurture the child has everything to do. So by the time the child gets to you, the most important period of their life has already been gone through. It's already over. Now, in America, we make sure to harm the children as much as we can in public schools. So we put them in first grade at age 6 instead of 7 when the teeth are really coming in. When their second teeth are coming in, then they're ready for their brain convolutions to form into something that will be the home of imagination, not the home of sense-bound materialistic thinking, or Steiner calls it shadowy thinking. And so that's what we're trying to do from birth to 7, is give them something to imitate, and everything you do should be of the highest quality. Every bit of food, every bit of clothing, the land they walk on, everything. But from 7 to 14, we're trying to give them what Rudolf Steiner said that Oswald Spengler and Froebel and all these other great educators, Pestalozzi and all of them, they were materialists. They did not have imagination. They were not creative. So what was my job as a Waldorf teacher from 1st through 8th grade? Well, I was supposed to bring everything in pictures, beautiful pictures. And if I was good, then the pictures would sound. And if the pictures, after they sounded with music and all the beautiful stuff, then it would enlighten them as the creative word. That's really what we're trying to do. So we're trying to give them imaginative pictures. And where do they get the pictures for their writing and for their drawing and for their coloring and for the music? All from teaching them each year a different culture through the literature. So the literature that they're studying, just as you as a parent, here's what I did. I couldn't send my children to a Waldorf school, so I took all of the Waldorf books from kindergarten through 8th grade and put them in our den. And I paid them $1 for every book they read and could come back and take a test with me because I knew every book. And so I would test them. The great thing is that my eldest child, when he did this, he saw more into those stories than I did. And I'd been teaching those stories for 20 years. And then he'd tell me something. I go, that's in there? Really? Well, that's kind of like the key to the whole story. Well, I missed that. And let's see, how many times have I taught it? So that's the thing with teaching. If you're teaching right, beyond the 4th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade, 5th grade, they call the golden age of childhood. It is. The children are perfect angels. They're higher beings during their 5th grade when it's done according to the proper age, and they've been given the right nutrition, and they've stayed in a Waldorf school from preschool, and their mother school was good. Because if I get a child from mother school, I'll talk about that in a minute, that is bad. The mother did a bad job. The father did a bad job. The family, the society did a bad job. Well, I took those perfect angels into 1st grade, and everybody said, well, you have perfect angels. That's the reason they do so well. Yes, they were perfect angels. And I was so honored because yes, absolutely. But then after the word got out, because I took a full class, I 24, 20 something students, more students would come. And so I would let the students who wanted to get into the class come and spend a day or two, see if they liked it, see if the students liked them. And the 2 students would tell me all about them. And in every case, the class accepted every single student. And I got students who had full-on Tourette's, who would, cuss and scream and yell, who twitched and moved all the time, constantly spastic movement. I had to have my hand on that child at all times. So he always stood next to me in circle, or he was right next to my desk. He was my helper. I was, and also other children who'd been kicked out of every school they'd been in that were so aggressive. And so they all chilled. As soon as they got to doing it the right way, they all chilled. So Waldorf education is a healing education. And this is what I want to emphasize. It's healing for the teacher. I know it definitely healed me. Healed every single day I was in the classroom. As I told you before, I never missed a day because teaching made me healthy. And it's healing for the students, and it's healing for the families, because a Waldorf teacher becomes a family member. So that's what is supposed to happen, that you know that child so intimately that if they're a little slow at first, but you have complete confidence they're going to speed up later, because the children's temperaments usually reverse from when they're young to when they're older. You wait a few years. So the child can't read and they're 9 years old. So what? Fine. Another child read when they were 5.5. Fine. You just mix them all together. Everybody's beautiful. And you just do it together. And then you get inspired. And as I said, the greatest questions I have ever answered, I did not think of the questions. They were asked to me by innocent children who were proving that I was being quite ignorant in what I was saying, and that I really needed to do more homework. And that's what the third stage of education is about. From 7 to 14, I taught in the high school, of course. We had a high school in Detroit and other high schools, Waldorf schools. And so what are we trying to teach there? Clear thinking. But what is it the child is learning? Only one thing: who you are. So if you're teaching from 9th to 12th grade and you're a history teacher and you don't know your history, those students should eat you up and spit you out, because you're not showing clear thinking and you're not showing them how to think clearly. And anyway, if you were a good Waldorf teacher, by 8th grade, your children should be coming in teaching you things. 8th grade is like a launching pad, because they've developed fantastic skills for the 7 years from 1st through 7th grade when you're teaching the etheric body. Then in the 8th grade, which is why 8th grade shouldn't really be part of the system, but in the 8th grade, they recapitulate the whole thing at a higher level, and then they go into high school. Well, as I told you, the last 8th grade I graduated was 12.5 average score. They were already beyond high schoolers. Well, that's what the Waldorf school does. It teaches them not to take tests, because I didn't use a single test ever in Waldorf. You don't put them under test pressure. You put them under performance pressure. So all classes are performing. So in my books, you'll see plays that I've written for 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, whatever. But I wrote them with the children. I didn't write them and impose them on them. We studied the whole Hebrew nation and its history in 3rd grade, until we were doing, all the different rituals. Sukkot, we were doing the festivals. We were doing things in Hebrew. We were reciting the first verses from the book of creation. We were basically became Hebrews. And then we became Greeks. And then we became Romans. And then we became ancient Indians and ancient Persians. And we became Babylonians. We became Gilgamesh followers. We studied Hermes, we studied Zarathustra, we studied all their great sacred, ancient, religious, beautiful stuff, as you'd want to give to your child, but distilled through the teacher. So the teacher's ego and astral body has digested it all and is able to give it to the children, not just spoon feeding it to them, but so that they themselves need to have the experience. So you create experiences for them. You create chances for them to literally live into being an ancient Indian, understanding, that Vak, the great creator, is great. They learned 12 different creation myths under me. And so at the end, I had them write their own, and it was better than all of them. Every one of theirs was better than every creation story that I ever shared with them from all the world religions, right? That's where you're supposed to be going. If the children don't go beyond you, you didn't do it right. And of course, they're going to reach your limitation. Now, this is the strange part. And in the book, The Eternal Curriculum, as I'm explaining this to one of my students, and I have the biggest chart up on the board, explaining everything, the whole history of mankind and the way it works into the physical, ninefold physical constitution of the human being. Everything is there. And then this person walks up and says, well, that doesn't look right. What about this and this? And that's all the person said. And I looked at it and went, bong. And for 10 years, I've been teaching it, never understood what it was that was really going on. And so I put forth an idea in here for Waldorf teachers. So if you think that you really understand the curriculum, once you read this, it's free, PDF online, then go back and take a look at all the years you taught as a Waldorf teacher and see what you might have really been doing. What Steiner set up was the most brilliant form of non-historical, it's not a chronological historical view of the way the human being repeats culture. He chose from different time periods to meet the child's exact need so that at that time, when you teach them that, they eat it up like you can't believe. They need it. It's nutrition. It is their livelihood. It is who they are. It's what they're going through psychologically, mostly physically, soul, spirit. They want it so much in every night when they come out of sleep. And the great thing about the Waldorf school, all the parents said, every single parent, my child is happy to go to school. They're anxious. They dress themselves and they're waiting at the door to go to school. They're so anxious to go to school. Okay, ask any parent in modern age if their child is anxious to go to school. Right there's the proof. Matter of fact, Steiner said, by the color on their cheeks, if they're flush, if the blood is flowing, if they're healthy, if they're vibrant, and when we meet them at the door and shake their hand, we make sure they're healthy, and we make sure that if there was any horrible trauma or nightmare or anything, I stand right at the door. I don't care how long it takes. And I get grounded with the child. I ground the child before the child goes into the classroom. And I'm there to help them get over the fact that they saw the movie Jaws last night and they're scared to death, and everywhere they look, there's Jaws eating people. And then they're going to bring that into my classroom? No, I have to stop Jaws right here at the classroom door.
Yes, I think that it gets down to some areas that are obscure for most people, because see, Waldorf education has a firm foundation in what is called epistemology. And epistemology is a theory of knowledge, that it's to be clear about what you're trying to be clear about, really, essentially. And as the Dalai Lama once said to Douglas and I and a couple other friends, more important than being smart, being clear. And if you're teaching students, you learn real fast whether or not you're being clear. And many times it's funny, because I remember when I was in school and I had to take a remedial algebra course, but the teacher ended up being one of the best teachers I ever had, because he had to take a remedial algebra course. And so he understood the pitfalls. And we always felt like he was with us when we were struggling with certain aspects of it, that we had somebody that was actually present in our struggle. Whereas I'd had teachers before that were like way up here and it was easy for them. And so they couldn't understand why he didn't get it, And so there's so many different underpinnings of education. And the real key, I think, is what Dr. Douglas is pointing at, although he's not naming it by name, but it has to do with humility. And it's that whole concept of the washing of the feet or the tying of the child's shoelace.
That's so true, John. The children can read right through you. I'd say to a teacher, they'd show up and they wanted to, I've hired hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teachers. So my last job, I had 250 people that I was working with as a superintendent. So when I speak of how many teachers I've worked with and how many teachers I've trained, it's no exaggeration. I can't figure out how many. But I can tell a teacher before they sit down. And so the teacher comes and applies. And by the way, I've taught in public schools and trained them to be Waldorf teachers. But I've taught in Waldorf schools and couldn't get them to be Waldorf teachers, some of them. Okay? And that's what's going on right now. So what I'm saying is you can go straight for the wisdom yourself. And that's why we call it for wisdom children. You're the wisdom child, parent. Oh, you're not? Well, you better catch up, because now you have to train your child. And so, like all the great thinkers, the limit of their understanding is what? They know civilization is crumbling, and the only hope, the one and only hope they all agree on, is education. We must train the children so that they are not limited by the knowledge that got us into this mess, basically, paraphrasing Einstein. We need a different type of intelligence to get us out. And it's not intelligence, and it's not knowledge, it's imagination. It's creating the new icons, the new idols, the new things, leading motifs, leitmotifs, that we can then rally around. We need new type of heroes. We need understand that the heroes are coming to us from the spiritual world, and that right now we have the greatest interaction between spiritual beings and humans that we've ever had in human history. But if you don't know human history, and you don't know, for instance, you can break it down and say, well, what I love people say, I think we need to go beyond Steiner. And then they'll show me Ken Wilber. And then they'll show me Sri Aurobindo. Then they'll show me Maria Montessori or Annie Besant, or they'll show me Gene Gebser. Oh, yes, Gene Gebser on his stages. Or they'll show me the Kingfisher History Encyclopedia. They'll show me, and I'll say, oh, even Oswald Spengler and his stages of the culture development and culture decline. And he says by 2000, the Western culture will have collapsed, and for 200 years will be led by our leaders, who will just become basically dictators. Oh, he's pretty accurate about that, huh? So Steiner said he was accurate about that, but he's a materialist and he had no imagination. Well, these people, they could trace a little bit of history chronologically, and they often come up with similar things. And that's interesting, but I'd rather do it the other way. I'd rather go with somebody who can look at the situation because they're clairvoyant, look at all of history, analyze it, analyze what's needed in our time, and give us the Waldorf curriculum. Because you can study these other curriculums, and they're partially true, but they don't have the application. They don't have the comprehensive ability to meet the needs of the child in all areas, religion, science, art. And yes, religion was taught in the first Waldorf school. They let ministers from all religions come and teach because it was universal, and all races were included, and it was co-educational at the time. That was shocking that Steiner allowed boys and girls to be educated together, and that he gave a history of culture that was not chronological. So in the first grade, kindergarten, first grade, they teach especially German and Russian fairy tales, but also fairy tales from around the world. I taught Jataka tales, which are the fairy tales about the Buddha's previous lives, and Chinese fairy tales, which are fantastic. So you can teach any fairy tale you want. Why? Because it's archetypal. The child is still up above their head. They're not even in their head. They're coming down slowly and bringing that etheric head down to the throat and down to the heart over a 7-year period. And you're teaching each section as it's going along what it needs. So the fairy tales, they're not the oldest writings. Why would we start with them for culture in the kindergarten? Why do we start with the oldest writings, the Upanishads? Well, no, we teach what was taught as morality teaching by the spiritual world to everyone on the world, ubiquitously to the Aboriginal cultures, and survived into the age when it was finally written down by the Grimm's brothers and others. They wrote it down. It had already existed. It was a morality teaching every time you went to sleep.
Yeah, that's a real key that people, they don't really know this, and it's right before you, because there's so many aspects of world culture that people are familiar with, but they don't realize the depth that is contained archetypally within these stories. Although there has been some help over the last century or so, people like Joseph Campbell and his wonderful books on mythology, so there is that, and there is places where you can go. There's been encyclopedias of mythologies. I have a couple here, and so you don't have to become an expert on a subject to be able to approach a subject. Or you can go to the wonderful stories of George MacDonald. I mean, just the literary value of what he wrote is absolutely astounding. Or poetry of A.E. or William Butler Yeats, or on and on and on. It's just, there's such a large amount of choices that it takes you away from the mold of education. And one of the best people for pointing out that mold is Charlotte Iserbyt. And she was one of the first people to come forward and say, hey, wait a minute, the Department of Education is coming up with things that are not good. And she wrote a book called The Dumbing Down of America. And she said the American people have got to understand that at the top, both parties have the same agenda. Another agenda is a planned economy. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it a conservative planned economy, or a communist planned economy, or a Christian planned economy. It doesn't make any difference. It's a planned economy, which means that your children will have no upward mobility at all. There will be no future for them. We will have no free market anymore. And she was in the Reagan administration and was a senior policy advisor at the Office of Educational Research and Improvement, among other things, and for the Department of State. So there are the rare individuals that has a deeper look at these things. But just to be able to find out that something is wrong, that's not good enough. And so what Dr. Gabriel here has to offer is what you can do to remedy the situation for your children and for yourself. And that's the key, is that the more you can bring this into your own world and inhabit what you're teaching, so that you have something to give the students that you can't give half-heartedly. And so if you fully enter into this, it's transformative. And he's absolutely right. The questions that come up, they're questions you wouldn't have thought of. Why? Because you're not dumb. And so that's the beauty of it. And that gets into the whole thematic understanding of human destiny, and that there's two aspects to culture: that which you receive from your ancestral line, from your parent, but then there's also that input that's coming from your previous incarnations. Now, if you're not comfortable with that, okay, but at least be capable of a healthy suspension of disbelief.
Yes. Dumbing down of America. We used to preach about that all the time. And Steiner said, don't dumb it down ever. Teach it in symbols, in images, in moral imagination, but do not dumb it down, because these children are beyond you. I mean, isn't that what we're hoping? And that they're going to go beyond you? So why would you ever give them a piece to the puzzle? Give them the puzzle and they'll probably put it together themselves. I had a policy: never, ever avoid a child's question, and never, ever speak anything but the truth. Now, there are times when you're telling the truth and you're talking about history that you might have to add a little color to it, because we don't know really what it was like. Who can say what it was like in ancient Egypt? So sometimes, as we're going over these things, that's why it's so difficult to be a Waldorf teacher. You need to live into what the children are experiencing of it. But if you get the book Intuitive Learning and you're a public school teacher, that'll show you the methods. If you get the book The Eternal Curriculum, that's for teachers and parents, and that will teach you what you need to meditate on. If you get the book The Spirit of Childhood, that will teach you how to teach the first grade and give you examples of other grades. And essentially, we provided those for people so they can then go to the last step. If you're teaching the eternal curriculum, the word eternal in it is because it's the etheric body. And there's a book called The Eternal Ethers. And why are the ethers eternal? Because as long as there is time, there will be ethers. And as long as there are children, wisdom children, there needs to be an eternal curriculum. We can't just teach the children up to the age we're at now. What are we pointing at is going to be the future? Where are the leitmotifs? Where's the icons? And that's why, after all those years, when someone asked me that naive question, it blew my mind. And I went back, had to redo the whole thing. My magnificent chart had been passed around in the Spirit of Childhood book, and And people had believed that for years. And then I looked at it and went, oh, I'm so embarrassed. Strangely enough, though, that book has got more downloads than any other book on the Waldorf e-library site, which I helped create. And I'm so pleased because we like to give these things away because poor Waldorf teachers can't afford all the books they need to do their preparation to teach what they're supposed to teach. So when they get to second grade, okay, they should know all the good fairy tales. And oh, by the way, just in case there's any Waldorf teachers listening, if you get this book, which is hard to get except in a digital copy, you can get it on our site, Eternal Curriculum. There is the descent of the alphabet. Steiner gave the descent of the alphabet to Eurythmus. And so now we know how to teach the proper order of the alphabet to a first grader. And when you get to first grade, you're teaching fairy tales, but you're also teaching knitting. You're also teaching music, 2 different languages, painting, beeswax, sculpture. We're teaching drama. We're teaching everything. All the 9 muses are in our room at all times. We just invite them all in. And we kowtow to the 9 muses in the liberal arts and Waldorf education. So when we get to second grade, that etheric head has come down a little bit further, but they're still in their mind this great big world they live in. It's like they have a huge head. If you look at a child, their head is exaggerated compared to the body when they're young. You teach Aesop's fables. You teach legends and saint stories, things that are by nature exaggerated, especially, but you start off with Aesop's fables. And Aesop's fables, that's what they taught the princes and the kings. This is morality training. And you don't have to tell what the moral of the story is. The children know it immediately.
Look, this can be intimidating for parents, especially if they've already come through the public school indoctrination program. So a lot of you out there might think that the way you set up a school, even a homeschool, is you've got a silo called math, and you've got another silo, and it's called English, and all these silos throughout the day. And as soon as the bell rings, you move to the next silo. And one thing that was very frustrating for me as a student is that in math, they didn't let you speak about literature. Or if you're in science class, you couldn't speak about art. Well, that's exactly what the Prussian system wants. It wants you thinking in silos and never connecting dots, never seeing the whole picture. What Waldorf does from the very beginning is integrate into the child and into his very spiritual bodies the history of humankind and the creative thinking necessary to push forward. Imagination is very important. So when you see so many people that took the cootie shot and are walking around believing mainstream media, well, of course, they were raped. They were brought up in this Prussian system. You can only think in the silo in which you are in. So doing Waldorf education and then all the materials we provide, it helps to re-educate you, adjust your thinking so that you're more open-minded, creative, and it does the same for your children. And Douglas will tell you all the time, there's no right and wrong. If you make a mistake along with your child, that's just being a human being.
Yes, I'm glad you brought us back to the Prussian education system, because most people, they have no idea what that is. And I'll give you the short version, is that coming through the Middle Ages and on into Renaissance period and through that, there were a great many wars between all the different princely states and different noble houses, and there was always something chaotic going on. And they would organize their armies, they'd get all their peasants together, and they'd have them take whatever weapons were assigned them or even farming tools and march off to go to war. But they had a big problem. Every time they do that, there'd be these people that would leave. They would just go, no, I'm not going there. And they would take off. And so by the time that they got to the battle, they didn't have nearly as many people on their side as they started out with. But Prussia figured out how to get past that problem and created an education system whereby you create a citizenry, which is really, that's stretching the use of that word, but to have subjects, we'll call them, that follow your object. And so the Prussians made a great deal of money loaning out armies as mercenaries in various different wars, because when the Prussian army showed up, all their people showed up. They were like true believers. It was their duty.
Because the school bell rang. It
Yeah,
was time to change.
yeah,
And it
was
made
their
great
program.
little soldiers. And
Yeah.
they continue that form of education through college and universities. You become, you get 2 years of gen ed, and then you've got to get your specialty. Well, when I was in school, when I got to graduate school, I didn't want to be in a specialty. I liked studying everything. The only degree was humanities. And of course, my family was like, well, what are you going to do for a living? Well, I made out okay. But the reason I made out okay is because I had the ability to imagine. I had the ability to complete tasks, show up for the job. These are the kinds of things that your children will learn in a true educational system, not one that is meant to make little indoctrinated citizen soldiers, which is what has happened. And they have infiltrated the Waldorf school movement and most private schools. And parents, you've got to check under the hood. Have they signed up for this diversity, equity, and inclusion program, which is just Klaus Schwab sitting in the classroom with your children? And if you agree to that, don't be surprised when your little girls come home and want the breast chopped off. Oh, no, excuse me. If you're in California and they want to be the other gender, and you don't want that, the California state will take them away from you, because as you started in the very beginning, this system is saying they own your children.
Yes, and the Prussians are known as good mercenaries because they do what they're told and they don't do any free thinking. And then Fichte, one of Steiner's great teachers, stood up against that. And so when Spengler came forward and said, we're at the end of civilization, it's declining. After World War I, everybody said, he's right. So everyone adopted Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West, which John pointed out is called The Morphology of Culture, without understanding culture. Who inspires culture? In the past, it was the priest kings. It were people who had divine connection. And then we create monarchs who say that they're bloodlines that have divine right of kings.
And don't forget, all the textbooks, whether you're in a middle school or you're in graduate school, come from publishers that are run by the Pilgrim Society. They're not going to allow truth to be spoken in these books. So the generational indoctrination is just awful. And where does this all come from? You look at when somebody says, oh, I went to an Ivy League school. I go, oh, well, I'll avoid you then, because they have already been indoctrinated in that system.
Yeah, well, you can even go to one of their own. You can go to the story of Carroll Quigley. When he wrote Tragedy and Hope, he was given access to the documents of this Pilgrim Society consortium, you could call it, consortium, but that these individuals had a plan for you. And it wouldn't be something that you would like, but that didn't matter. And so when he published his Tragedy and Hope, it was quickly bought up. It disappeared off the shelves. A few copies got out to libraries and all of that, but he gave the whole itinerary, basically, of this group of people, without mentioning the Pilgrim Society, of course, not once in the whole, big, thick book. And it was reprinted eventually, and Bill Clinton, he wrote something in the new version of it, but it has become the basis of a great deal of historical criticism, but it's still pure materialism.
You see me jumping out of the gate here because there's something else I want to, and you being, both of you being anthroposophists, you see, the human body, as you guys know, but maybe our listeners don't, the human is more than just this physical body. We have an etheric body, an astral body, an ego, and it goes on and on and on. And so the process of education is welcoming that little being into the world and slowly educating them. Now, if you yank the baby from the mother's womb, which is when the physical body is developing, that is called an abortion. But there are also other abortions that occur along the way. You just may not be paying attention. The next is that the child needs to be with the mother. Well, that in the more traditional family, that has been utterly destroyed. Women are going off to work. They're not at home with their babies anymore, and they're made to feel bad about it. But then what's happened is that child's etheric body, it's essentially been aborted because it's been ripped away from the very nourishment it needs at that stage of development. And then when you move further, when the child is ready to go to school for that next layer, and when I say school, it should be more of a community. It's a more social. You're developing your astral body when you're the young children that you described, Douglas, all the way up to 21. And that is now being destroyed. That spiritual body of yours, of your children, is being aborted, but you can't see it and you don't know it as such. So you send them to public school, you're aborting them at that level. And then when they get to be 21, they're not ready for anything. So you can just shoot them up with graphene oxide, hit them with the remote control, and they are wetware for life.
Instead of the holistic approach of bringing things in a healthy way through the willpower that have been screened by spiritual adults in their environment, then into the feeling realm, and then into the thinking realm, what is called the psychomotoric realm, where you should be doing all this stuff in a Waldorf school or even in a Montessori school. They do stuff. It's the exercises of practical life. Steiner says, don't teach them anything in kindergarten that isn't real life. Let them imitate life. And you don't need to add thinking to the kindergarten. That comes later. So we bring it up through the will into feeling, which is called the affective domain in education, and then into the cognitive, as they call it in education. So this is from the will to feeling to thinking. And as we do it, we always start with the whole, as Tyler pointed out, and then break it down. And when you do that, it's just like these fairy tales and what John was saying. These are complete engrams. These are complete schematas. These are complete morality teachings. And as you teach one culture after the next, up through 5th grade, when you're teaching India, Persia, Egypt, Chaldea, Greco-Roman, and Anglo-Germanic, well, guess what happens? And so for you who are Waldorf teachers out there, if you think you understand it enough, get this book, and you're going to find out that you need to maybe do a little more thinking, because 6th and 7th and 8th grade are beyond our time. So the 6th grade, they develop, we teach them about what? Christian, spiritual, intentional communities and utopias. And in the 7th grade, we teach them about exploring to the point that they become a Renaissance person. And in the 8th grade, as I said, they're beyond you. So if you think the curriculum is an initiation process, I think you're right. I can tell you there is no end to the depth of it, and that for yourself, no matter how many times you go through it, you will continue to deepen yourself, and you will bring to your children the very nourishment that they need so that they can be what we used to call global citizens who love all cultures and literally feel as if they are part of those cultures. And when you do that, then the children can go beyond you. And even in 6th and 7th grade, they can turn into beings that are literally beyond your imagination. There is nothing that a Waldorf child can't do that they set themselves out to do if they have the right environment and a Waldorf teacher who can be selfless, get their selfishness out of the way, and get their community out of the way, and provide the children with what they need for their nourishment, for their body, soul, and spirit.
Yes, there's an old saying, if you can serve tea properly, you can do anything. And so I want to thank Dr. Gabriel and Dr. Tyler Gabriel for this wonderful presentation today. It's deepening our understanding. I've been around this stuff for 50 years and I still am a sponge. I can just keep getting more and more deepening and widening. And that's the whole idea. You shouldn't be intimidated by this because, of course, you have to begin at the beginning. But remember, the students at the beginning also.